This latest season of Dark Side of the Ring concluded with an episode on Muhammad Hassan, played by Mark Copani for a couple of years on WWE television. Hassan was a young Italian guy with some promise who worked under the name Mark Magnus in Ohio Valley Wrestling before Vince McMahon came up with the idea to turn him into an Arab American who vented about how poorly other people started treating him in the years after 9/11. And pro wrestling is no stranger to the foreign menace heel. For almost 100 years, promoters have been making money off characters like that. I just talked about the Sheik in my last Dark Side of the Ring review. Baron von Raschke, right, became the evil German who would goose step to the ring like a Nazi. Nikita Koloff, he went from being an all-American boy from Minnesota to becoming the Russian nightmare in Jim Crockett Promotions. Mr. Fuji, he was the devious one, right? The evil Japanese heel, even though he was a Japanese American from Hawaii. You had the Iron Sheik, you had Nikolai Volkov. Sergeant Slaughter went from being G.I. Joe to being an Iraqi sympathizer during the Gulf War, and on and on and on. It was a good way to get heat in the territory days. A lot of those guys made money getting people to hate them and wanting to kill them. Did it cross the boundaries of taste? Yeah, in some cases it definitely did, and no one will ever mistake the wrestling business for being the last bastion of decency. But it's a little bit different in today's age where you have a big global promotion like WWE and a young guy taking on a very polarizing character like this. If it works, it could lead to major success for them. Working with top talent and making a lot of money and maybe even becoming a world champion. But at what cost? Because what goes up must come down. And all of these foreign heel types, they have a shelf life. Very few of them can make an entire career out of it without at least making changes at some point. And for some, it's just damn near impossible to make changes. If you're playing a fake Nazi on TV for 15 years, it's probably going to be hard to change that. But when the gimmick runs cold, are they going to be able to change to a totally different character and make people forget about everything they did prior to that? Or will they be permanently branded for the rest of their career? That's the risk you run. Most people never saw Mark Magnus. They only knew Mark Copani as Muhammad Hassan. And maybe that's all people ever would have seen him as. We'll never know, because as quickly as he rose to fame, he burned out and was never heard from again. And the most frustrating part of this story as you watch the episode is that it wasn't even his fault. He lost his job through no fault of his own. He lost his job because his boss decided to take a character that could have been interesting and decided to dumb it down, predictably, to play to the absolute worst stereotypes. And when he took it too far and it blew up at his face, there had to be a fall guy, and the fall guy wasn't going to be Vince McMahon, who came up with the very idea that got the character kicked off television in the first place. We go back to the early 2000s and, think about that period, right? Steve Austin, the biggest star in the business, is forced into an early retirement. The Rock is off making movies in Hollywood. The Attitude Era is done. And then it was on to Ruthless Aggression in 2002. And WWE was trying to create new stars because they had to. A lot of those new stars came out of Ohio Valley Wrestling, which was WWE's developmental territory at the time. And out of OVW came Brock Lesnar and John Cena and Randy Orton and Dave Bautista. Mark Copani also came through OVW, and he even won the OVW heavyweight title at one point. Jim Cornette was running things in OVW at the time, and he got the call from WWE one day that they wanted to make Copani an Arab character on television. And when he told his family, they had concerns. I'm sure they did, right? We were only a few years removed at this point from the 9/11 attacks. And Copani talked in the episode about where he was when they took place. I remember exactly where I was when they took place. I think most people listening to this right now remember where they were and what they were doing on that morning. In our lifetime here in this country, we had never experienced anything like that before. The first plane hits, you think, boy, what a dumb pilot. Like, how could you accidentally fly into the Twin Towers? Then the second plane hits in real time as you're watching the news. You literally see the second plane slam into the other tower and your heart just sinks because now you know, right? That sense of dread just comes over you. This was no accident. And then reports come in about the Pentagon being hit, and there may be other planes in the air. One of them may be headed for the White House, and you're just scared about how this all ends and who's behind it. Now, this guy is being asked to play a character on TV that he knows is going to touch a nerve with a lot of people, and not all wrestling fans fully understand that these are just people playing characters on TV. Sometimes they take things a little too far. It's entertainment, but they don't necessarily look at it like any other television show. And frankly, even on other television shows, you hear stories about actors that play a character that people don't like, right? Or maybe their character killed off another character that people loved, and the actor gets death threats. Like it's real. Or like it's their fault that the writers decided to kill off this other character. Like it's insane. Point being, some people aren't playing with a full deck of cards. You don't know what lunatic might be out there and how they're going to react to a character like this. And Mark had reservations about how the character would be portrayed because as an Italian American, he said that he knows what his grandfather went through, and he heard about what, Japanese Americans went through during World War II. But he realized, you know what? This could be my big break. This is a huge opportunity for me. Wrestling's all about getting heat. Like, oh man, this is going to get so much heat. Although there is such a thing as too much heat, or the wrong kind of heat, if you take things too far. I remember reading, I don't know how true this is, I remember reading that Rhino gave an interview many years ago where he took credit for the character. Like, he was tired of sitting in the back not being used, so he started growing out his beard with the idea of pitching a character that would convert to Islam. And Stephanie McMahon walked by one day and asked him, like, why are you growing out your beard? And he explained the idea to her. And then a few months later, by happenstance, I'm sure, Mark Copani was on television playing Muhammad Hassan. I don't know how true that is, but I'm sure a lot of guys sitting in the back, bored out of their minds, were trying to come up with different ideas that never saw the light of day just to get themselves on TV. So they brought in Sean Daivari as Hassan's manager. He was an independent wrestler at the time. He was only 20 years old. Daivari's even younger than Hassan. And they interviewed Michael Lombardi for this episode. He was a WWE writer and producer at the time. He talked about the vignettes they filmed and how the idea was that Hassan was an American character of Arab descent who was very upset with the way he and his friends had been treated since 9/11, not because they were terrorists, but simply because of the way they looked, right? People would look at them and they would step on the other side of the street if they saw them walking by. People would give them dirty looks. They would be stopped at airports, like that sort of thing. And that was something that a lot of Arab Americans, I'm sure, had to go through at the time and might still go through. And when you think about the character through that lens, that's kind of interesting. It's not your prototypical foreign heel character in wrestling. It's someone who isn't wrong in what he's saying. He's just sharing his experiences, and he's making some valid points, but the fans don't care. They boo him anyway because they're allowing their prejudices to come through. That was the idea behind it. And it's like, okay, this is a little more nuanced than, say, Ludwig Borga, okay? Nothing too deep about that. So that was the idea behind it, and then they showed a clip from an episode of Sunday Night Heat, where Todd Grisham and Ivory, they were hosting, and they mentioned Hassan was debuting the next night on Raw. And Ivory asks Grisham, how are you getting to the arena? And Grisham says, well, I'm driving. And she says, oh, good, I don't want you to be flying if you catch my drift. There's a lot of shit back then that has aged like milk. That would be one of them. So you knew then and there, this is not going to be some complex character with layers to it. This is Vince McMahon being Vince McMahon. They found Gene Snitsky for the episode. Snitsky said he can't remember anyone getting that much heat since the Iron Sheik. People wanted to kill this man. And Copani says WWE wanted him to portray the character 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even outside the ring. And it really gave him an insight into what it was like to be Arab American. It opened his eyes. He also talked about being very young and other wrestlers being very resentful of how hard and how fast he was being pushed. There's one story where, and this has been told before, but they had it in the episode, where Kurt Angle told Hassan that Eddie Guerrero was using the camel clutch in some of his matches. And when a guy gets out of it, it makes Hassan look weak because Hassan had been using the camel clutch as his finish. So he was trying to get Mark to go confront Eddie about it. So Mark finds Eddie in the locker room and he asks him, hey, do you think you should be using the camel clutch? Because it's my finish. And Eddie tells him he's always used it. And in fact, his father is the one who invented the move. Which is true, by the way. Gory Guerrero is credited with being the first one to use the camel clutch. So there's some debate about whether or not Kurt told him that as a rib, knowing that it would get him in trouble with Eddie, or if he was being totally serious. Daivari, in an interview many years ago with Wrestling Inc., said that he thought Kurt was being 100% serious and that it wasn't a rib. And I think Daivari was paired up with Kurt Angle for a while. So, he got to know Kurt a little bit. He thinks he was being serious and it wasn't Kurt trying to fuck the guy over, but who knows? In any event, we got a wrestler's court story out of it that ended with Copani having to buy over $1,000 worth of drinks for the boys, a lot of whom ended up just pouring the drinks out on the floor. And then later, Eddie put his arm around Mark and told him he knew he didn't mean anything by it. Flash forward to WrestleMania 21. Copani got to work with Hulk Hogan, and he was giddy about this because he grew up watching Hogan. Now he gets to work with him at WrestleMania. For him, it was like a dream come true. It wasn't a match that they had. There was a segment. It was Hassan and Daivari confronting Eugene, which led to Hogan coming out and making the save. And then they did the tag team match. It was at Backlash. It was Hogan and Shawn Michaels against Hassan and Daivari. So you realize, like, all of the top names that this guy got to work with in a very short period of time. Like, he got to work matches with or do segments with Hulk Hogan, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, John Cena, Mick Foley, Chris Jericho. Like, not bad. Not bad. He did more in 7 months than a lot of guys do their entire career. And the character was working to the extent that it's still, generating a lot of heat. But WWE then decides to take things in a more radical direction. I think radical is a good word for it. And that was the beginning of the end. They turned him into a terrorist. That's basically what they did. Like, they never said it. There was nothing explicitly done that made him a terrorist, but give me a fucking break. It was very clear what they wanted you to think he was. They went for the low-hanging fruit, and they did the one thing that Copani said he did not want to do with the character at the very beginning of all this. They turned him into basically a fucking terrorist. He confronted Stephanie McMahon, who was writing Smackdown at the time, or maybe she was leading the team that was writing Smackdown. He spoke with her about his concerns. And he says that she basically told him to shut up and do what you're told. We know what we're doing. They even had him start using the throat slash gesture right before he would do his finish, which had a very different connotation when he would do it, as opposed to, let's say, The Undertaker. This was at a time, seriously, this was at a time when you had reporters who were being beheaded. And they mentioned Daniel Pearl. He's the first person I thought of. Daniel Pearl was a journalist who worked for the Wall Street Journal. He lived overseas, and he was kidnapped. And then he had his throat slit, and he had his head cut off. So they knew what they were doing when they had Hassan doing this type of stuff. Just like the Ivory comment on Sunday Night Heat. This entire character was pitched as something it was never really intended to be. I mean, let's just be honest about it, okay? Bruce Pritchard has said, the original concept was that he's a guy who makes some reasonable points, but he's got a manager who yells and screams in Farsi. And there's nothing scarier than a guy screaming at you in a language that you don't understand. That's what they were going for from day one, no matter what they claimed the character was supposed to be. This was just the mask slipping off. And now they were showing you exactly what this was intended to be. So in the spring and the summer of 2005, the belief has always been, and it's backed up here by Hassan and by Cornette, that they were going to Either put the world heavyweight title on him at SummerSlam or at least put him in a world title match. And they didn't say SummerSlam here, but that was the plan. SummerSlam that year was in Washington, D.C. And so what better place to get heat, right, in their eyes, than by putting the world title on the evil, the Arab American guy in our nation's capital. The evil guy who's going out there with his masked men and doing throat slashes. Like, we'll do it in D.C. And D.C. was also Batista's hometown. You know how things usually ended up for guys in their hometown back then, right? Chances are Batista was dropping the title that night. And it wouldn't have been the first time that they would have done this type of angle at SummerSlam or thought about doing it. Like, we all remember Lex Luger against Yokozuna in '93 and that whole storyline. Love it or leave it, and Yokozuna coming out there with the Japanese flag and everything. That was in '93. 2004. They had the idea to have Chris Benoit defend the World Heavyweight title against Kenzo Suzuki, the foreign heel, which never materialized. Randy Orton ended up getting that spot. 2012, this was always my favorite story. 2012, there was actually a plan, believe it or not, to have CM Punk possibly defend the WWE Championship at SummerSlam against Lord Tensai. Holy shit. That would have been awful. But they were giving Tensai a big push that year as someone that had traveled to Japan, and he had great success, right? He was Giant Bernard over there as part of a tag team. And I'm not even saying like Matt Bloom was a terrible wrestler. Oh my God, this would have been like the great Khali wrestling in the main event. But just Lord Tensai against CM Punk as your SummerSlam main event. Yes, that would have been fucking terrible. Remember he had Sakamoto as his manager. You don't remember Sakamoto? No? Okay, well, most people don't. But they even gave Tensai a big win on TV over John Cena. That's what makes me think the story is true. They were legitimately pushing him. He beat John Cena on TV. I wouldn't be shocked if they had a long-term plan for SummerSlam with the idea that if he gets over as a monster heel, we'll put him in a championship match. But yeah, the foreign menace heel, it's a card that they played many times before, even though he wasn't technically foreign, but that's the idea behind it. Hassan against Batista, it never happened either. And it's good that it never did because he wasn't ready for a spot like that. I mean, he may have been getting heat and he could talk, but he was still very young and very inexperienced. I think to put the title on him would have been a big mistake. Had that been what they decided to do. I don't even think they knew that far in advance, honestly, whether they were actually going to put the title on him. But do I think it was discussed and the match itself was probably going to happen? Absolutely. But before any of this could happen, he started an angle with The Undertaker. And a little trivia note, a young Tommaso Ciampa once appeared on Smackdown playing Hassan's lawyer during the time that he was feuding with The Undertaker. I think he even got beat up by Undertaker. But it was building to a number one contenders match that he would win, which would earn him a world title match. Instead, Undertaker ended up squashing Daivari in like a minute. And then they shot the infamous angle. The angle that ended up killing Hassan's career once and for all. Not just the character, but it ended up killing his career. What they tried to do was recreate a jihadist terror attack, basically. Only instead of beheading The Undertaker, they had Hassan send 5, quote-unquote terrorists in ski masks into the ring to beat him up. Again, this is the visual they were going for. I mean, they could claim, oh, we never said they were terrorists. Like, you know what they were going for. 5 men in ski masks who run into the ring to beat him up, and they choke him unconscious with a piece of piano wire. And then all the men carried Daivari from the ring as a martyr. Okay, this was taped on a Monday, I believe, to air that Thursday, because SmackDown aired on Thursdays back then. Funny enough, the day that they taped this angle was the 4th of July. So that Thursday, there was a terror attack in London where terrorists carried out 4 separate suicide bombings that targeted people who were commuting using public transportation during the morning rush. 52 people were killed, over 800 people were injured. And WWE had a big problem now because SmackDown was already in the can and it was ready to air that night on UPN, right? SmackDown aired on network TV back then. what they should have done was they should have pulled the segment because it was incredibly tasteless, but also they should have known that it would have led to bad press for them. But they opted to keep it in the show for the U.S. audience. And they can claim all they want to, which I think they did at the time. Oh, they didn't have time to edit it out. And they had time to edit it out. They had time to edit it out of the UK broadcast and other places in Europe. But in the US, it aired in full. But what they did was they put a scroll on the bottom of the screen that said, in light of today's tragic events in London, parental discretion is advised in viewing tonight's episode. Our old pal, Kevin Dunn, the longtime executive producer for WWE, later told the New York Post, "We're very proud of our product. We try to be sensitive with everything that we portray." Oh, yeah. "But there's got to be protagonists and antagonists on our television shows. We just happen to reflect the politics of the world sometimes, especially with these Arab American characters. We are firmly in the entertainment business, and that the plot," he said, "as edgy as it may have been, should be taken tongue-in-cheek." I should point out that this was for a New York Post article that ran some, what was it? I wrote it down here. 5 days. It was 5 days after the show aired. Variety and other media outlets, they picked it up later as well. Only after the Drudge Report website picked up the story. Had the Drudge Report not mentioned it, it is entirely possible that nobody else would have said a word about any of this. And it would have flown completely under the radar, as so many things in wrestling have over the years. I don't know how often media folks bother checking Drudge these days. I used to check out the Drudge Report, probably 10 or 15 times a day. But that used to be the place to bookmark and go to for news. If you saw it on Drudge, like, you could be sure everybody else would be picking up on it. It was going to be, if it wasn't already a big story, it's going to be a big story. And it's not even like they break news so much. It's a news aggregator website. They have links to stories from all these other places. They're not usually breaking stories of their own, but Drudge was the one who first leaked the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky scandal after, I think it was Newsweek, killed the story and they wouldn't run it. He ran with it. He's really the one who broke it. That's what he became famous for. But anyway, it did get picked up by the media. And it did not paint WWE or UPN in a positive light, because UPN was getting collateral damage from this. And once the New York Times got a hold of it and they bashed UPN for it, that's when things got very serious. 5 days after the angle aired, UPN calls WWE and they tell them, "We don't want this guy on the show. We want Hassan off the air." The original plan was for Hassan to beat The Undertaker at the Great American Bash, with an assist from Randy Orton, and go on to SummerSlam. But now he couldn't even appear on TV. He still worked a match against The Undertaker at the Great American Bash because they could use him on pay-per-view. They just couldn't use him on TV. You know, the writer I mentioned earlier who worked for WWE, Michael Lombardi, he voiced his disagreement with the direction of the character. And for voicing that opinion, he claims that he was demoted and stripped of his duties. So at the Great American Bash, Hassan got squashed by The Undertaker and he got powerbombed through the stage. And when they showed him down in the hole below, he was laying there with blood splattered all around him. One of the few characters in wrestling history to be murdered on television, never to be seen or heard from again. I know Lucha Underground says hold my beer when it comes to murdering characters, but in WWE, you didn't see that very often. And they had the gall to send their head of public relations at the time out there to make the following statement with all of the heat coming down on them. And I shit you not, this is what he said. "The whole point of the storyline and this character was to point out the injustices Arab Americans have suffered since 9/11. Now you would hear that and think that they booked him to do some kind of sympathetic character. But if you actually watch the show, you would know the exact opposite was true. They really thought people were stupid. A lot of their audience may have been. That's probably what they were banking on, but it made them look even worse because they were lying through their teeth, all in the name of damage control. That's all this was. And now, Hassan was not immediately let go. I think a couple of months went by. They may have sent him back down to OVW. I don't remember, but a couple of months go by, and he was either quietly released or they let his contract lapse, and he was never brought back. I remember thinking at the time, like, why don't they just move him over to Raw? Like, if UPN doesn't want him on SmackDown, but Spike TV, doesn't object, then put him on Raw. But I guess Spike TV didn't want the bad publicity either. Or USA, because I think later in the year is when they moved back to USA Network. I'm sure USA and Spike and all these other channels, they saw what happened, and I'm sure they didn't want that heat either. So he was a man without a home. He had no place to go. It would have been hard to repackage him. I don't think it would have been impossible to at least try. They would have had to let some time go by first. I mean, I'm talking months, not weeks. But then bring him back as Mark Magnus, the Italian guy from Syracuse, kind of mocking the fans for being gullible and fooled into believing that he was actually Arab American, right? I mean, maybe it would have worked, maybe it wouldn't have worked. But I think the best way to face it, short of putting the guy in a mask, would have been to acknowledge it. But just acknowledge it, acknowledge that it was all just an act to get under people's skin and prove how ignorant they really were. I don't know. I think it could have worked. They never even tried. I mean, it's better than just ending the guy's career. He didn't do anything wrong. Daivari didn't do anything wrong. They did what they were told to do, and they tried to make the best of it. Copani got heat for arguing against some of the more radical elements of what they wanted him to do. So he tried to say something at least once, if not multiple times in the past, and he got in trouble for it. He had heat. That's how fucked up the entire situation was. Now, Daivari's career continued, but I don't think Copani ever had any desire to work anywhere other than WWE. I think Daivari even told a story years ago about being at an autograph signing or a convention or something, and it might have been the first time in a long time that he had seen Mark. And I think he said like Mark didn't seem like he was really enjoying it or having fun. And it just sounded to me like if he couldn't be in WWE, then he had no interest in being in wrestling. Like that was his dream, and he made it there, and it all happened like too much too soon. And then it was over, and it was over like in the worst possible way that it could be, the way they just sort of discarded him. But I don't think he ever had any interest in going anywhere else, because to him it would have been a step down to go to TNA or to go to Ring of Honor. Back then there was no AEW. So when WWE got rid of him, that was it. He left wrestling behind. And he moved to LA. He fell into a deep depression. He thought about suicide. He knew he needed to make a change in his life. So he started working nights at UPS. He became a teacher. I think he went back to school. He became a teacher. He eventually became a high school principal. And his attitude now is he got to live out a dream by working with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. His last match ever on like the big stage. I think he had a couple of independent matches years ago, but like for all intents and purposes, the last real big match he ever had was against The Undertaker. Right? I mean, all these things that he did, it was fleeting. It was a moment in time, but at least he can say that he did it. And now he enjoys what he's doing with his life. Cornette says he's probably better off doing what he's doing now rather than another 20 years of wrestling bullshit. I tend to agree. I was thinking the same thing, like 20 more years of bumps and injuries and politics and bullshit. Physically, he's probably a lot better off. Today, he's the director of human resources at a small school district, and he seems very content. So, good for him. He was asked recently by Steve Fall of 10 Count Media whether he would be open to a WWE return, and he said that he would be, but it would depend on what they had in mind. He's not sure what is to be gained by bringing back the guy who played Muhammad Hassan, because that's really all he thinks they could do with him. And with his current job, he could never portray that character again anyway. So he doubts very seriously it would ever happen, but he would be open to other ideas. I don't know what they would be, but he claims he's open to it. Yeah, I think that ship has sailed. There really isn't anything to be done. I mean, that character needs to stay dead and buried. But if there's one thing this episode showed, it's just how vicious the system can be in WWE. Like, they will chew you up and spit you out the first chance they get. And it's all about self-preservation. You know, when shit hit the fan with this whole situation, through no fault of his own, he took the fall for it. He took the rap for it. He took the heat. It wasn't even like, look, you got to lay low. Shit went sideways. We're going to take you off TV, but don't worry. We're going to let some time go by and we'll figure something out. Like, that never happened. That would have been the right thing to do, and it never happened. And in fact, Copani said in the episode that at one point he wanted to buy a house. He was on the verge. He found a house that he wanted to buy, but he didn't know his situation was kind of in limbo. And he went to John Laurinaitis and said, "Hey, John, should I buy this house or not?" And Laurinaitis said to him, like, "Don't buy the house." So, I mean, they just completely just discarded the guy. Doesn't matter if you do nothing wrong. The minute there is any sign of trouble, they will be the first to find a scapegoat to take the fall, because it is never their fault. It's always someone else's fault. I don't know that he would have gone on to become a Hall of Famer or anything like that, but he should have gotten the chance there to do something else and not just be banished into exile. At least his story has a happy ending, though. I mean, again, he seems like a well-adjusted guy who loves what he does. And you know what? That's really all any of us can ask for at the end of the day, is to just enjoy what we do. And so ends Season 6 of Dark Side of the Ring. I hope you have enjoyed all of these reviews. I enjoy doing them. I've covered all 6 seasons so far. Hopefully there will be a 7th. I think that they are already mulling over potential topics for a 7th season, which has not yet been greenlit by Vice, so it may or may not happen. But if there is a 7th season, I just jotted down here just a short list of potential episodes. I'm sure you guys have ideas. You can chime in as well. One thing I will say I've heard is that there has been talk of a possible episode on Trent Acid. Acid was a big independent name who died of a drug overdose in 2010. One of those what-if stories. So I think there's been talk about a possible episode on him. But as far as other potential subjects they could cover or names they could cover, Rick Rude is one that I think is something that they should consider, probably have considered maybe doing an episode on him, especially how things came to an end for him. Perry Saturn, he's had a pretty wild story. Mike Awesome, Ashley Massaro, which to me is an obvious one. Takeshi Morishima. I've talked about him on the show before and his rise and fall. Morishima's one. Crash Holly, Mike Lockwood, is another one. Rock and Roll Buck Zumov. If you don't know the story behind Buck Zumov, oh my goodness, you better be careful if you look that shit up. Don't look that up before bed. Could definitely get one out of him. And one name I always mention, and they haven't done an episode yet, but I feel like in terms of what ifs, he's definitely one of the bigger ones from the independent scene, is Sweet and Sour Larry Sweeney. He is somebody that you should look up if you're not familiar with his work, his promo work, wrestler, manager, great talker, very charismatic guy. I think had the potential in many ways to be the Bobby Heenan of his generation. And took his own life many years ago. He's friends with a lot of the guys you see on TV now. You know, they came up with him. They were very friendly with him. I think doing an episode on him, I don't think you would struggle to get too many people who knew him that you could interview for it. I think he could absolutely have an episode dedicated to him. And then the other one I thought of, and maybe it's a little too recent, I don't know, but the Speaking Out movement from 2020 and all the names and all the careers that it took down and went down in flames coming out of it. Can definitely do an episode on that. Maybe they want to hold off a little bit longer. Look, Daphne had an episode this season, and Daphne took her life in 2021. And I think I even said when I reviewed her episode, it still feels very fresh. But they did an episode on her. If they did one on her, they could do one on the Speaking Out movement.